she's staring at.
Tetris, the absolute, the Grandmaster, 2 plus 2 equals 4. That's a mouthful. Originally an arcade release from the year Y2K, the year 2000, and added to the hamster line of arcade archives games in 2023 for PlayStation 4 and Nintendo Switch, the latter of which is being featured today, is the sequel to Tetris the Grandmaster, which is the Tetris game that's more focused on speed and expert play, and, well, this is more of the same. Which isn't necessarily a bad thing if you enjoyed that initial take. For those unfamiliar with the Grandmaster line of Tetris games, I think they made a couple more after this. I'm not sure. I really don't care. These are generally more challenging iterations of your typical Soviet mind game. On the surface, it's the usual Tetris fare. You know, blocks fall from the sky, you use them to clear lines and they go away, that sort of thing. But every drop raises the level by 1, which results in drops being much quicker, much sooner. For the most part, gameplay remains the same as in the previous game, save for 2 minor tweaks. First, the traditional hard drop that slams the piece to the bottom and locks into place, done usually by pressing up on the D-pad, has been replaced with a slightly more flexible sonic drop, as the game calls it, which acts similar to a hard drop, but instead of locking into place, gives the player a little bit of wiggle room to move the piece around before it locks into place. The second tweak is a one-line buffer zone above the well that gives you a bit of wiggle before you tap out. So, the absolute grandmaster of wiggle room this game is. Although I will admit, I'm not a fan of the sonic drop or whatever it's actually called. I like my hard drops to be hard and lock into place so that I'm already thinking about the next move, and this sudden, unexpected flexibility usually screws me over a couple times here and there. I'm sure it has its uses, especially in the later rounds by more proficient players, but to me it's more of a nuisance than anything. But the rest of it though, the same ball-crushing TGM stuff you've had before, and then some. TGM 2 Plus boasts 6 modes of play from the get-go. You've got normal mode, which lets you play up to 300 levels before the credits roll and pieces start insta-dropping on you. Master mode, which is your standard TGM experience where you try to attain a high ranking within the 999 levels of play, which, I should remind you, the level goes up with every drop. TGM Plus is an ungraded master mode where a line of garbage blocks will be added to every so often. TA Death is Tetramino's insta-dropping to the bottom, giving you only a fleeting moment to react. And of course, there's Versus and Doubles, the former being the traditional 2-player competitive mode, and the latter being a 2-player cooperative mode, similar to what was featured in Tengen Tetris on the NES a long time ago. Much like in the previous release, TGM2 Plus's controls, well, they have a stickiness to the general responsiveness of button inputs, like tapping on the D-pad to make brief movements or even holding direction to slide the piece to the sides or whatever. I don't know, it doesn't feel quite as tight or as responsive as it should be. It's really hard to explain because it doesn't feel quite as smooth as a typical Tetris control setup, yet it's not completely worthless. I don't know, it's playable to a degree, and with enough practice you may eventually get used to it. It's really something that you have to feel for yourself, and maybe you'll feel differently, I don't know, but these controls felt odd in how they responded, and I couldn't quite pinpoint why. Even so, it's not a total deal breaker. The game remains largely playable and even highly enjoyable to a certain degree, though make no mistake, as the name implies, this is a Tetris experience geared towards a more seasoned mindset and thus should not be taken lightly. As per tradition with these Arcade Archives releases, TGM2 Plus also includes a high score and caravan mode, both of which can be played in either normal or TA Death modes under default settings. No big block mode though, which is a bit of a shame unless I missed it somewhere. Probably not. Much like in the previous game, the overall presentation of TGM2 Plus is fairly simple. You have a well, you have basic looking blocks. Every so often the background changes to something more odd and outlandish. Simple, functional, straightforward, not much to say there. Sound is also equally fairly functional, with a slightly remixed version of the generic background wallpaper music from the previous game droning in the background, slightly speeding up at later levels, some mild sound effects, and some applause and jingles for good play. TGM Plus 2. Oh, fuck, I lost. Whatever. Retains the unique sound cues denoting the next piece, where each of the 7 tetrominos have their own unique sound effect, so if you're solely focused on the playfield and not anything else, you have some audio cues to let you know what piece is coming up next. And I always like that bit. It's a nice little audio clue that you have to pay attention to, which is a nice touch. Overall, Tetris the Absolute, the Grandmaster 2 Plus is more Tetris the Grandmaster, but with plus stuff. And the plus stuff is what gives the sequel a little added value over its predecessor, and is probably the one to get if you had to pick one Tetris to be a Grandmaster in. Once again, this is not a Tetris for the casual folks who want a relaxing session of falling bricks or whatever. There are a couple other Tetris games that serve that fancy just fine, but for those wanting a little more out of their Tetris experience, TGM 2 Plus might be worth your while.